And best viewing practices, mute when you're not talking. When everyone joins, I'll also mute everyone. Now we're loading to live. All right, Tina's joining us now, Rodney. She'll save you from having to answer her questions.
Yeah, I sent her a message.
Everyone, and we're live. I'll let Tina in when she joins us. I'm gonna go ahead and admit everyone. Hello everyone, thanks for joining us today. My name is Chloe Edwards with Voices for Virginia's Children, and you're joining us for Racial Truth and Reconciliation Week. Thank you. Everyone, as you're entering, you should be muted. You can change the names on your screen as well. I'm gonna change mine right now. And feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat. All right, thank you everyone for joining us for Voices for Virginia's Children and Virginia's first ever Racial Truth and Reconciliation Week. You are joining us for a community chat series where we share insight and information on the challenges communities are facing today and how these challenges are being used to address issues at the local, state, and in some cases, the national level. Today, we are showcasing the work of 4 organizations coming to the table: Virginia, the Southside Trauma Informed Community Network, which is supported by Crater Health District, the Winchester Area Trauma Informed Community Network, backbone by I'm Just Me movement, and the Truth Telling Project, which is also home to the Campaign for Truth and Reparations. I'm here with Danita Rountree Green, Frank Moseley with Coming to the Table, Brian Little with the Southside Network, Councilwoman Tina Culbreath will also be joining us with I'm Just Me movement and Winchester Area Trauma Informed Community Network. Councilwoman Tina Stevens, and David Ragland and Melinda Salazar with the Truth Telling Project. I'm gonna go ahead and start off with introductions, and I do hope that all of our participants can also introduce themselves so we can get an idea. I know it's helpful for me to know who's in the room, but let's go around and introduce ourselves. We'll start off with our guests joining us from Coming to the Table. Danita and Frank.
I should unmute first. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Danita Rountree Green, and I am co-CEO with Martha Summers of Coming to the Table RVA. I'm glad to be with you all today.
Hello, everyone. My name is Frank Moseley, and I am the co-chair of the Reparations Circle for Coming to the Table. I co-chaired with Tina Slaughter, and we are happy to be here, and thank you for inviting us.
Hi, everybody. I'm Judith Martens. I'm in Northern Virginia. I'm an independent infant mental health consultant, working with healthy families and some preschools and family child care providers here in this area.
And that was introductions for presenters specifically. Brian Little with Southside Network, could you introduce?
Sure. Thank you, Chloe, for having this assemblage today. I'm Brian Little. I'm the chair of the Southside Trauma Informed Community Network. I'm also the Special Projects Manager with the Crater Health District in the Southside Crater region.
Thank you. And we do have a lot of topic to cover, so if you are a participant in this chat, please introduce yourselves in the chat. I see a couple of introductions so far. Thanks, everyone. Tina Stevens, Councilwoman Tina Stevens with Winchester area ticket. Could you introduce yourself? You're on mute.
Thank you again for hosting this. It's definitely a critical resource for our communities. So my name is Councilwoman Tina Stevens. I am also a co-founder of I'm Just Me Movement, which is a nonprofit organization that serves youth that have been impacted by primary and secondary trauma. And I'm happy to join you guys today in this very critical conversation.
Thank you. And the Truth Telling Project, Melinda.
Hi, my name is Melinda Salazar. I'm talking to you from the seacoast area of New Hampshire and southern Maine. I'm serving as the co-director of the Truth Telling Project, along with Dave Ragland, and previously with Pastor Corey Bush, who was just won the primary in St. Louis. I'm a retired faculty, and I am just thrilled to see all your faces and hear your voices today.
Thank you, and I'm looking forward to hearing what everyone has to say. I encourage everyone to be engaging in this conversation. I know I work better when our audience is engaged and interactive, so if you're really feeling something, make sure you put it in the chat and comment. If you have any questions, make sure you comment. And if you're viewing us on Facebook and you really want to get this important message spread, make sure you're sharing it, or you could even host a watch party. Let's go ahead and get started. I know we have a lot to cover. So everyone has introduced themselves as far as our participants. I welcome the audience to also answer this question in the chat. But for our guests joining us today, our presenters, could each of you share details of the work that you do in relation to the organizations you're representing today, but include a detail on how COVID-19 and Black Lives Matter has changed the way in which you've done your work? Let's go ahead and start off with coming to the table.
Thank you again, Chloe. And again, it's an honor to be here with you guys today. This has been a very exciting time for coming to the table. You know, as you may or may not know, coming to the table is all about the intense and courageous, yet often clumsy and uncomfortable conversation on race. And we pride ourselves in creating a virtual table now for people to come together, to share their personal stories, to bring their challenges as far as how they are healing from the wounds of enslavement, and to hopefully build relationships at the table, as well as walking away with actions, answers and actions that they can use to move their personal lives forward, their communities, and hopefully in their systemic relationships and engagements all over Richmond, Virginia specifically. But Coming to the Table, as you know, is a national organization. Richmond happens to be the largest chapter, with over 1,500 people participating online, engaging with us that way, at about 300 people engaging in the monthly conversations that we have. And we read books, we go on trips in our life pre-COVID, and it's phenomenal. And COVID, yes, it has been a learning curve for a lot of us that come to the table. We're an older demographic of people. Most of our members are 45 and older. So having to move from the up close and personal to the digital way of being in relationship has been a challenge. However, we have met that challenge and moved into one of our major goals of bringing in a younger demographic, being able to partner with organizations like yours, Chloe, also hopefully Black Lives Matter. We've already had relationships with a lot of colleges here in the Richmond area, U of R and VCU and the artist movements here. So we were moving in that direction, but this has actually sent us with a torpedo rocketing toward building relationships in communities where we may not have been very present. The thing that we give most to this work is our ability to facilitate conversations, giving people the tools to do the hard work, to talk about something that's stymied us for generations, historical generational trauma. And we create safe spaces for folks to come together. And I know that in your outline, you asked what were the results of that? What do we see at the table? Well, first of all, we're able to see a blended community come together monthly. And people actually make friends, share personal stories, and decide together how they want to show up in the world to do things. We've done advocacy all over the city, particularly when it comes to Virginia's children. We work in our churches, helping to, again, facilitate very, very difficult conversations. We've been able to do that with law enforcement here, which is a difficult road to hoe a lot of times, but we show up for that. And been able to talk about the health disparities that we've been able to see just in our own coming to the table of a community, of how COVID has affected our African-American family members, and how we can be a healing presence in the community with our work, hopefully through the health department as we move forward, and other initiatives that are working for change. We really see the conversation on both pandemics, the COVID pandemic and the race pandemic, as a way to really show up differently. And all of those things come under racial healing. And one of the major components of racial healing is reparations. How do we repair the things that are broken? And on that note, I'm going to hand you over to my friend and colleague, Frank, who is one of the co-conveners for that committee.
Thank you, Danita, and thank you again for all the work that you've done. I think that I'd be remiss without saying that it was you who started the Reparations Circle here at Coming to the Table RVA. And I'm honored to be able to work with Tina Slaughter and the other individuals that are involved with reparations coming to the table to try to advance our goal of creating conditions of change for reparations. Many of the things that we do as far as bringing people together and having these clumsy but courageous conversations involves moving people to the next step, which is actually taking action. And our Reparations Circle is designed to do that. It's designed to give our members a place to go and find the resources that they need to connect with organizations in the community, connect with movements in the community, and to be a part of the change that we need to make. And to have this all of racial, systematic racism dismantled once and for all. I think that what we are really focused on is bringing people together and having these conversations, but connecting communities together. And I think one of the most important things that we can do is really be a part of every community conversation as it relates to repairing what's broken, because so many of those things stem from the economic inequality that we all face or have faced as the legacy of slavery. I think that what we are really focused on is creating actions that people can actually go out and do. One of the things that we're working on is the Brown versus Board scholarship, where we are working to extend the scholarship that was provided to the students who were disenfranchised by the school closing in 54 and 64. Those individuals were able to receive scholarships. However, the descendants were not. And as you know, that the legacy of slavery and everything that has impacted, including education, and how it has stifled our ability to move forward and be progressive. It is a generational impact. And so to not have the children involved in that reparative act, we think is something that we need to address as an organization. So those are one of the things that we're working on. Out of the conversations that we create, we are also created a documentary series that we've been recently funded for. And with that series, we are bringing together people who are connected through history, through blood, purpose, and place. So through our conversations, we are creating these linked descendants ties and learning more about the relationships that former slave owners and former slaves descendants have with one another and can have with one another in a healing process. We want to bring that to everyone as a model for conversations and discussions. So we're doing what we can with the Black Lives Matter movement. We are very aware of the needs of the community. And so we really want to try to engage with being able to support those efforts. I think that has really changed the way that we've had to address how we move forward, and hearing and listening more deeply to the voices of African Americans that are part of our membership and African Americans that are part of the community. So I would encourage all to continue to have those conversations and then try to find an action to take immediately after.
Thank you for sharing, and we'll loop back around to coming to the table a little later for them to share more on some of the best practices they're putting into place to do these things. Let's go ahead and spotlight the Winchester Area Trauma-Informed Community Network. First, when you start off, Councilwoman Stevens, could you tell everyone what a Trauma-Informed Community Network is? But also the question is to share your unique perspectives as a woman of color, councilwoman, a trauma-informed community network leader, and a nonprofit leader. How do these perspectives contribute to your response to COVID-19 and Black Lives Matter? And you're on mute. Still on mute. Unmute. You're on mute. There we go.
Okay, I'm going to get used to this. So we are in three really hard times right now. We have COVID-19, we have the Black Lives Matter movement, but we also have trauma. And it is, so first of all, the Trauma-Informed Community Network here in Winchester, compared to some of the others that have already started, we are in our kind of phase of bringing on cross-sector collaborators to bring more awareness to our communities about trauma. What does it look like? How can we really help support our children and families that have been impacted by trauma? But with the additional pieces of COVID-19, we now have children without their mentors, without their teachers, without their peers. And students oftentimes, when they go through these hard times, they really depend on an opportunity to connect with someone else to say, this is what's happening, this is what's going on. And because of Wi-Fi and other opportunities for kids to connect with humans face to face, you know, it's been difficult, even with Zoom calls with students, parents, or abusers are often just a small ear away. So we don't get those very organic conversations that we would normally get with our children. So staying connected with them at least once a week, and just to let them know that there's a caring adult in their lives, that we are there to support them in this hard time, whether it is getting them connected to resources or helping them with housing insecurities. Some of our students live in motels in the Front Royal area. So, but it's been a juggling act almost, because we have these three pieces and components that are negatively impacting our communities, and staying on top of that, staying educated, and staying connected to resources in the communities, because we want to keep kids connected to natural resources. So our goal is to continue the work that we do through the Trauma-Informed Community Network to keep people educated and to bring those resources in. I'd love to be able to have our in-person trainings and community events so that we can connect with parents and other agencies. Currently, we are using Zoom, so the whole technology of Zoom. But also as Councilwoman, I am working with our council on proclamations and reclamations and resolutions, because I know that these racial and systematic ways that people are oppressed are happening in schools and in our governments and etc. And so I want to make sure that we are doing something intentionally to make sure that people and residents in our communities feel that they are supported, that we hear them, and that we are there as a support for them, but also to hear their concerns and validate those concerns. Oftentimes people don't want to talk about race, but I think having a resolution and a proclamation is an intentional way to show our residents and constituents that we hear you, we are putting our words to action, and so it's a united front in terms of my council role. So thank you again for having these important conversations. And it is a juggling act to juggle all three of these pieces.
Thank you for sharing. And now we also have the Truth Telling Project here, who is also home to the Campaign for Truth and Reparations. Could you share more about the concept of reparations and reconciliation? List examples of truth and reconciliation that you witnessed take place, or that the Truth Telling Project is working on.
Sure. Thank you, Chloe, for both coordinating and just being an amazing human being who's doing incredible work. The Truth Telling Project's main goal, and was founded for the specific purpose of helping people tell their stories about the ways in which they were traumatized by, or family members traumatized by police violence. We began during the uprising of Mike Brown, the protests in Ferguson following Mike Brown's murder. And the kinds of programming that we have organized have been squarely centering individual people's stories. And as we collect these stories and create hearings, truth-telling hearings along the line of truth-telling, truth and reconciliation commissions, like the ones in South Africa and Rwanda and Greensboro, Virginia, one of the things, North Carolina rather, one of the things that we have discovered in the truth-telling process is that while the harm is continuing to take place, the telling of the story, while there is a healing component, both for the speaker, the person giving the testimony, and for the witness, those listening and both hearing the stories, while the harm continues to take place, there continues to be a re-traumatization. And so what we identified were the shortcomings or pitfalls of truth and reconciliation commissions. And what we've come to just sort of through the process of people telling their stories, and when what those listening have been left with is that reparations is a critical midpoint between truth and reconciliation. How can we have full healing? How can we have some sort of reconciliation when the harm continues to be done? So we have stories that we've collected shortly after Mike Brown's murder. Young people were brought together in the St. Louis Ferguson area. Youth Speak Truth. They told their stories in that hearing format.
And those stories live on our website, and we've been able to analyze those stories and pull out important lessons in units that can be used both in the classroom, this was pre-COVID, both in the classroom and in community conversations, Night of 1,000 Conversations, where we're able to tease out what the themes were. And just 5-6 years ago, these themes were relatively obscure, and still obscure to a lot of people, but relatively obscure to the average person not experiencing police violence in their lives. Now, in the wake of current prominent events, George Floyd and the others, these issues have become, there's been a greater light shown on the particular themes and issues. And then COVID certainly has continued to shine a powerful light on issues of health and healing and the ways in which Black and Brown communities are disproportionately impacted. So the piece you want me to focus primarily on the reparations piece. One of our projects is a truth and reparations campaign, and we will be holding our very second Reparations Sunday on August 23rd. The first was held in Ferguson last year for the convening of Mike Brown's, the 5th year anniversary of Mike Brown's shooting. So we will have a website that will have a toolkit for how to bring interfaith communities together or ethics-based communities to hold a Reparations Sunday that addresses the important issues and the way in which reparations is this midpoint between truth and telling the story, truth and reconciliation.
Thank you for sharing. And we do have time to kind of pick this apart a little more. So I want to invite kind of the audience, those participating today, and to also share how COVID-19 or Black Lives Matter has changed the way in which you do your work, or thought about the way that you do your work, or you can talk about your personal life in which you've been doing differently to respond. Does anyone want to? I can call in some people because I do know some of the people that are attending today. Let's see. Kelsey with the Alexandria ticket. I know for your last ticket meeting I attended, because you kind of share what you all have been doing. Are you on?
Were you asking me?
Yeah.
I'm still so embarrassed that I introduced myself and didn't
No.
mention.
Asking Kelsey to share too.
And I turned my camera off even. No, what we're doing here is really working with healthy families, trying to begin some of the discussions around race and how it impacts our work with different cultures and different families. We're sort of also focusing on biculturalism because we're finding that may be a little bit easier entrance in. The COVID, I think we're finding mixed responses to that in programs doing remote work. I do a lot of reflective supervision work, trying to support preschool teachers and family childcare providers in dealing with the COVID, to strengthen the people that are really working with the children and families and to help them deal with their own fears and frustration so that they have more resources to deal with children and families.
Awesome. And Laurie Crawford with Virginia Hills, can you talk some about your work? Virginia Hills was also a presenter earlier this week.
Yeah, so you know, we've been developing for kind of behind the scenes for 5 years or so, this model of service delivery for child, youth, and family serving agencies. And we're at the cusp, or 2 weeks ago, of our statewide rollout after these 5 years of work. And we have this grand plan of, going around and being in space with people. We've gotten sponsorship for lunches, and a lot of it is training on things like a screening tool where you are talking to children and youth about trauma. And that's typically the type of thing that's done face to face, in person. So not only are we now in a position where we're trying to do the training and how do you do role modeling and all of that, and something that was supposed to happen face to face. People in community can't do that face to face. And so it's a whole new world. But I think in some ways that these are things that came up that we heard, like even from youth, that maybe some of them maybe they would be more receptive to sharing things if it were some kind of virtual environment, to think about those things. And it's kind of challenged us to think more about different ways that we can reach people. And I think I put this in the chat box that, I think about this in two ways. The one is that, while we are challenged to be like, how do we do these role plays and talk about having conversations about things that are really tough, like trauma. And I know forensic interviewers and other folks are having the same struggles. But at the same time, there are more people who are able to engage in some ways because they can't travel and they don't have to spend the resources to get to somewhere that might be an hour away to get a training. And I was just thinking recently about just General Assembly reconvene and how probably there's going to be more people who are able to engage in a meaningful way than ever were in the past. If they lived in Southwest Virginia and had to come to Richmond and be at a meeting, and then they had the committee meeting, and then at the end of the day they said, oh, we didn't get to it, you need to come back in 2 days. Now that's probably going to do outreach to more people. So I think in that respect, we're trying beyond the challenges to see kind of the positive side. And the other thing is just, and we talked about this some in our community chat the other day, is we have constantly, because we are talking about things like a screening tool and about access to services for children, youth, and families. We know there are disparities. So we've been having these conversations about how to continually engage people of color in a more meaningful way. And I think that this has just pushed us to do that work even more with the Black Lives Movement and with the space that we are in. So, I appreciate the opportunity for all of these things that you've put forward this week, Chloe, and I think a lot of good conversations are ongoing. So
thank you for sharing. And others, you're welcome to. Melinda, do you want to talk about what the Truth Telling Project did around their truth hearing for COVID?
Sure, and I added into the chat box. We organized an event we called Harnessing Intercommunal Resilience in the Age of COVID-19, a forum in which Black and Brown-led organizations contributed to a dialogue about the ways in which their organization was working with their constituency to provide services and concerns. We are following that up presently with a visual video project that we're entitling Community Story Project. And it's a very simple project that we encourage all to participate in, where individuals are asked to contribute 5 words in their response that best describes their feeling, experience with the recurrent response. And we're going to put that together forthcoming. Pretty much that's the way we have been, the project that we address specifically to work with these issues. And the opportunity gave us a chance to network with individuals. One of the differences between the Truth Telling Project and the work that you folks are doing is that we're spread all over the country. So we don't have a geographic home per se, although Ferguson is our our roots, I should say. So just being able to reach out to individual groups and who are doing incredible work and sharing all the challenges together. And I see here that Chloe has also submitted the link to submitting your stories. We'll be working on that soon.
Yeah, so you can click the link if you'd like to submit a 5-word story, and you haven't had to personally experience COVID as far as the illness goes to submit a story. You can talk about how it's impacted just your life in general. We're gonna go ahead and spotlight coming to the table again, and I'm gonna ask you a question that's a little off guard before we get to the one that I had planned for you, but a lot of what you all do is just education around what truth, reconciliation, and reparations means. So if you could come up with a unique way that coming to the table explains it, could you kind of share what those 3 words means to our audience?
Okay, well, you said, give me the 3 words again.
Reconciliation and reparations are key words that coming to the table uses often, and also the retelling history component. Retelling
history, right. So thank you. And well, first of all, I want to say this, the thing that I'm hearing that's a commonality with a lot of what we're talking about today is how we are all being challenged to create the new normal in this time of COVID and Black Lives Matter. What we call the 2 pandemics running side by side or interchangeably. And I feel that this is not a coincidence. You know, at the table, we look at this as a clash of history. Some of us who are older have realized that this is not our first one, but it may be one of the largest ones that we've had. And it's giving us a real model of an opportunity to work with racial healing, with reconciliation, and repairing the things that are broken, which is exactly what reparations means. We are all used to doing this work in an environment of being up close and personal. I heard Miss Laurie Crawford explain how they were being challenged by this time. It's 2 things are happening. We are kind of losing some of that human element while we're online in this way in the virtual world. However, if we kind of open up our minds and look at the creative part of it, we can see how we can further extend ourselves to larger demographics in different ways. So I just wanted to say that this is the challenge of creating the new normal of where we will be moving as a movement of racially intensified people and knowledgeable people being able to share information. So to Chloe's question, we share information virtually about history and truth telling, and that's twofold. The stories that we have personally in our facilitated conversations, we start everything with I statements. That is, Danita doesn't talk about all Black people and our white family. They don't talk about the story of all white people. We talk about our own personal history as we take the time to delve into truth telling in history. And that is watching history through movies, documentaries, books, virtual tours now. And so we are learning how to revisit, re-see, empathize our roles and our places in history. Reconciling that we may not agree on everything, but also coming to grips with the knowledge that we cannot stay where we are if we want to move forward. We cannot stay where we are. We have to learn how to forgive each other, to reconcile. Okay, yes, this happened. This is why it happened, and it's important to know why it happened because we never want to go to that place again. That's something that we talk about quite a bit in the truth telling and reconciliation organization. We want to be able to put things in place so we never have to visit this place again. But racial healing, reconciliation, and the retelling of the story are vital to our survival and evolution as human beings on the planet. And we only get to that place through honest conversation, fessing up to what we have done to add to the madness so that we can do better as we move forward.
Thank you. Let's go ahead and spotlight Brian Little at the Southside Trauma Informed Community Network. They've done a lot of education and that around the retelling of history and highlight the intersections of race, culture, poverty, and trauma. Brian, could you talk about the work that the Southside Trauma Informed Community Network has done before COVID-19 with the Creator Health Districts Conference and the work that you all are doing now, which seems very timely for what was introduced at the conference?
Sure, thank you, Chloe. We've done a number of things with the Southside Trauma Network. We really try to engage our community about trauma and what trauma is, and the fact that it's an event, it's something that happened to you. It's not what's wrong with you. We usually talk about the lifelong effects of trauma. You know, many of us experience trauma. We are experiencing trauma perhaps through Black Lives Matter, the movement as it relates to police brutality, or as it relates to just looking at adverse childhood experiences and watching our children and remembering ourselves as a child and being re-triggered. So with Southside Trauma Informed Community Network, or better known as STICN, S-T-I-C-N, we spend a lot of time trying to build our membership and help them to understand the principles of self-care and trauma recovery and trauma responsiveness. To that end, we, on a monthly basis, do a check-in with our community, usually the first Thursdays of the month, and then on the third Thursdays we have our keynote with a normal meeting. On another front, we've done two major summits. We've done a basic ACEs, Adverse Childhood Experiences Summit in 2017, which was called Moving Beyond ACEs. And then in 2019, just a year ago, we did a summit, which is called Beyond ACEs. It was a summit around race, culture, and poverty. And so, you know, who would have thought that the summit that we were experiencing just a year ago would be playing out in real time on, you know, national or international television and in each one of our lives when we look at the things that have happened since last year. So the Southside Trauma Informed Community Network has assisted the Creator Health District, which is part of the Virginia Department of Health, to create the summit text body, if you will, body of work that was put on in Petersburg just a year ago, and then, of course, 3 years ago, 2017. On a regular basis, we try to help people to heal in a peer-to-peer scenario. We work with community leaders. We work with organizations such as United Way, who's one of our partnering organizations in putting on this Trauma-Informed Community Network in Petersburg and the region. And then we also work with departments like social services. And one of the things we've learned through coming to the table is how to begin to tell our story. So we realize that everybody has a story about perhaps an event or an experience that something has happened to them. And we started looking at those things in real time and trying to really see if there are patterns that we can actually build upon to begin to change the trajectory of trauma in the future, if you will. So we do that through partnering with organizations like Voices for Virginia's Children, where Chloe helps us to come in and write our stories along with Coming to the Table and Danita. And we try to look at that information and see if there are patterns that can help our children move beyond their adverse childhood experiences in a policy-making way with the Virginia General Assembly. So that really helps us a lot as well. So as it relates to, you know, COVID, we've really been trying to to peel back the layers and really see the truth of the matter, and looking at race and racism and all the other isms that there are, looking at environmental conditions, and looking at inequities across our region as it relates to healthcare, as it relates to trauma responsiveness, and as it relates to just equality among jobs and workforce development. So those are things we work with on a regular basis. And I do want to just mention, Chloe, that Crater Health District certainly has stepped up in a role of being able to govern and lead us with the science behind COVID-19, because there's the science of it and then there's the mental health of this pandemic. And so Crater Health District has been very instrumental and very pivotal with helping to lead us through the science of the pandemic so that we can understand what this is, what's happening to us. And as it is unfolding before us in real time, they're able to help us to really digest that information. And then on the stick-in side of things, we're able to provide programs such as a community conversation with leaders that bring a platform such as this one that we're on today to people within the communities to begin to educate people so that they become edified about COVID-19, about the fact that this could be a very re-triggering time in their present. And they may pull from their history to understand that, you know, something that's triggering me now happened to me when I was younger. And perhaps they're able to deal with it now. Perhaps some people are re-triggered by it. And those people who are re-triggered by it are some of the people that we're seeing in the media and social media, and particularly not knowing how to respond to this. So this is real, and we're in it. We want to make sure that we stay connected to community. We want to make sure that we can dispel the myths of COVID-19 as it relates to the Black community in particular. And then we want to make sure that we all get to the other side of the pandemic healthy, because we want to see us live. And so it becomes as simple as life and death. But if we don't necessarily follow the science, we won't get there together. So we really are trying to get all of our people to see how this is an important time in our history. Trauma is real. We're living in it in some cases. Most of us are. And we are trying to work through self-regulating so that people can get the self-care that they need to become resilient.
Thank you for sharing. And I know COVID-19 has kept a lot of people distant from each other, just connecting with each other in the virtual space. But I did want Councilwoman Stevens to talk about the I Can't Breathe marches in Winchester specifically, and your work on those. And I think you're on mute.
Technology, I'm still getting used to the mute and unmute thing here. Yeah, so, you know, we've been able to be inspired by young people that have demanded change for quite some time, felt like their voices were drowning anytime they would mention any disparities or racial inequalities or profiling. And, you know, when everything happened with George Floyd and he was murdered, these young people, I think that was the breaking point. It was, that is it. Like, we're not going to wait for another, I apologize. We're not going to wait for another situation to happen. We need to act now. So they wanted to put some plans in motion to let the communities know that enough is enough and change is here now. So they were organizing and organizing and organizing. And I said, you know, if you're going to organize, you know, let's make sure that you have the things that you need. The weekend before, they had a single march that they had it was called a spontaneous assembly. So a spontaneous assembly allows them to come and assemble and you know, share their truths. So that was one event. But the second event would have to take some permits and some deeper thinking about how they can have their voices heard in a way that they could still be within the law, And so moving from a spontaneous assembly to then an organized event where we could make sure that we could have people there to vote. So we had a voter registration there. They helped in organizing it, but they were the visionaries for this, and they just said, we need to be heard. So I was excited to be a part of that and just to help them with some of the pieces that they hadn't quite thought of in terms of legalities. But I'm really proud to say that I'm proud of our young people. And so because of that march, we had over 5,000 people on the I Can't Breathe Walk on Winchester page that they created, which then sparked, okay, we need to really listen to young people and let's create a teen summit. So we've created a teen summit, a race to justice is what the event is called. And it really is helping kids to find out what their truths are, have some advocacy and leadership skills behind that, and, you know, help to continue their path forward on racial justice, racial equalities, and breaking down some of these systematic barriers that they feel have been in place for quite some time. And up to this point, you know, people have expressed their dismay and their dislike and their experiences that have really impacted them in such a negative way. So with that being said, I have been totally inspired, and I hear the young people and I help to activate their plans and their visions to really have and make change. So we had 2 marches. The first march was a silent march. We insisted that we wanted to have some silence because we knew that George Floyd no longer had breath in his body to have and use his words. So we had an event from 11 to 1, which was a silent march, and we marched several miles around the inside of town. And then the second march was from 4 to 8. It was very vocal and very vibrant and very raw and organic, and a lot of raw emotions came out, but that's what we wanted. We wanted kids to feel that they were supported in that space. And so as a result, now the Museum of the Shenandoah Valley is now collecting items, and they are going to be doing a display on Black Lives Matter. And so this started from visionaries, 20-year-old visionaries that said enough is enough. And, you know, I'm inspired, and I'm glad to support them in any way that I'm able to do that. And so marching is one thing, but moving to actionable commitments is another, and helping them, you know, not only march, but to activate in other ways as well.
Thank you. Let's go ahead and leave it back to coming to the table. So there are best practices and strategies that Coming to the Table uses to promote racial healing and reconciliation as an outcome of what you call clumsy but courageous conversations. For those participating today and listening on social media, what suggestions do you have for other organizations that are engaging in similar conversations at the staff or board level?
Okay, and Frank, I encourage you to chime in here, but I'll start with getting in proximity. First of all, most of our fears live in our head, and that's where they permeate. So be willing to do the courageous thing, to be able to encourage diversity on your teams, especially in your leaderships, to simple things, walking across the street like we used to do 100 years ago, and meet the new neighbor and find out what they're about. Be very intentional about knowing when you invite other communities and cultures into your organization, into your churches, into your houses of worship, into your schools, that you're not inviting in a deficit. Realize that you are inviting in the opportunity for richness and wholesomeness and an evolution of change. So it's all about changing that kind of thinking of what we think the other is. Erase the distance, be approximate. That would be the thing I would say.
That was great. Not inviting in a deficit.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for sharing.
And, Frank?
Frank,
Yeah,
add
I
on?
would just add that one of the things that Tina touched on and so many others is understanding history, right? And really where we came from, getting into the roots and understanding uh, what it is that we are dealing with now. It's not something new. This is unfortunately something that even with the pandemic, I mean, we face a pandemic every 10 years. I know people are being keeping track of it, but a pandemic and a crash happens every 10 years. Ebola, 2 years ago with HIV, and each time we're unprepared. And I think that we have to start looking at history as a point of reference. So one of the things that we work on with reparations is not just acknowledgement of what has been done in the past, but education, understanding how these things connect the dots to where we are going now. If we go back to the period where Reconstruction, our the promise that was made to us, if we can go back that far and look at all the events that have taken place since that time, it creates a greater understanding of where we are now. These things don't happen in a vacuum. These things are all interconnected. And I think that one of the things that we are trying to do is encourage people to understand the history, because truth is our shield and our sword. And we need to arm ourselves because we have opposition that wants to keep the status quo. And in order for us to break that, we have to do it together. We can't do reconciliation. We can't do reparations. We can't do any type of healing as individuals. We have to do it as a community. We have to bring Black, brown, and white together. And so that is one of the things that we are really focusing on and really promoting as far as other organizations and board members to have this opportunity to learn as much as you can and share that knowledge. Our website has a lot of information, resources, if anyone is interested in learning more. I'm sure the Truth Telling Project's website as well has similar information. But educate yourselves, be strong mentally, and so that you can continue to carry this message, because it's not going to be an easy march. You know, the protests are one step. And as Tina said, we have to put action behind that. And so action means being able to mentally be prepared for these oppositions that we're going to have, and to be able to tool ourselves in a way that we are prepared for the other side of COVID.
Okay, and I know the Truth Telling Project, that's definitely similar to TTP's mission. Melinda, the Truth Telling Project does often discuss the concept of storytelling and the telling of truths and who gets to tell those truths. Feel free to add on to what Coming to the Table has said, but I'd love for you to also explain what a truth hearing is and how should communities, allies, and institutions empower the truths of communities to correct injustices.
Right. I'd love to just pick up on some of the pieces that Frank mentioned following Danita, and that is one of our outreach projects that we have yet to bring to fruition is a means by which we can take the material, the stories that we have, and the methodology that we have of storytelling to teachers in schools. And we were on our way working with teachers, social studies teachers, collecting names and planning a teacher convening prior to COVID. And the intention was to work with teachers to explain what it is that we do, to walk them through a process of using our It's Time to Listen online learning resource, both in their classroom, to get students accustomed to hearing stories and learning this listening skills, and then being able to draw out what the themes and social issues and policy issues, as well as the history component, and then to work with teachers to create curriculum and to engage students in their own storytelling, which I realize is fraught with public school policy, law issues around confidentiality. But we have not gotten to any of that as a result of COVID and schools closing. And we're looking at opportunities now as to how we can begin a conversation with educators. And we know that it's going to happen virtually. And I'm just curious, hearing the work that all of you are doing in your geographic area, if maybe you might be able to link us up with educators who would be willing to participate in a Zoom call, and begin that process. We have some other schools in Oakland, California, with whom we can be working with. But that I think is a incredibly needed, a huge gap. Just think about the 15 plus years of No Child Left Behind failed policies where teachers have been teaching to the test. And even if they wanted to have their students rethink history, they really have not been able to do so because that's not been on their state, their testing mandate. So we want to get into we want to work with educators, and perhaps there's a way that you might be able to work with us. Chloe, what was the second part of your question, please?
And we have one person here who put their contact information. So the Truth Telling Project often discusses the concept of storytelling and the telling of truths. Who gets to tell those truths? What is a truth-telling hearing? How should communities, allies, and institutions empower the truths of communities to correct societal injustices?
I can give two examples of truth-telling hearings in two very different Black and Brown communities. Remembering that the Truth-Telling Project originated after the uprising in Ferguson, the first truth-telling hearing with youth was in a community center, following that truth and reconciliation model, where an individual would get up and tell their story, be introduced, tell their story, and then there would be dynamic feedback of within the community. And you can, as we said, you can view these on our website. The second example, I used to teach at a university in Gallup, New Mexico, in the heart of Navajo Nation. And after I left, I went back and worked with some women community organizers in the Navajo and Brown communities, immigrant communities, to tell their stories. And it was requested that we be culturally relevant, and it is not appropriate to use the same model that was used in Ferguson. So in this case, the stories were told one-on-one to a member of the Navajo community. And in some cases, the stories were not told even one-on-one, but a woman chose to tell her story. A couple of women chose to tell their stories in sacred spaces on their land. So I think part of the truth-telling hearing setting is to ask the community where they would like to tell their story and in what kind of format. What's a culturally relevant way to look into your heart and to share your experiences. I will also say these stories no longer at this time exist on our website. They're in another location, but in the case of the Navajo stories, in order for them to be made public, they were then taken to elders for approval. So there's a process. So I think that's what I would like to share about that. In terms of, there's maybe some questions, but really the individual is just asked to tell their story, and drawing from what we know about Indigenous storytelling and talking circles, there it's best not to have a time. I mean, you could give a time limit or a suggestion for a time, but again, in some communities, it's not appropriate to give time. So that's another aspect to be taken into consideration.
And could you explain what a talking circle is for those who may not be familiar?
The talking circle really is the way Indigenous communities have historically all over the planet come together in a circle, sharing what's in their heart. And as I mentioned, the stories can be used as both in an educational setting to learn lessons, moral, ethical, spiritual lessons, but they can also be part of a decision-making process. In the classroom, we use talking circles as a way to engage one individual to talk about their experience, or it could be even in an academic, to talk about their learning. And also the participants are equally as active as listeners. So there's a speaker and a listener component that is equally as valid and important to the process.
Thank you. And there is a graphic for truth-telling tips for folks who may be engaging in clumsy but courageous conversations on the VA Kids website. I'll send everyone a link to those. But they're great tips to follow when engaging in these conversations. Let's go ahead and pass the mic to Brian Little with Crater Health District and the Southside Trauma Informed Community Network. As people are engaging in these, what could be traumatic conversations, what role is your Trauma Informed Community Network playing? And your community is unique to our colleague Tina's here, who her locality looks a bit different, but your community that you serve in is a predominantly Black and Brown community. How are we resisting re-traumatization, but also making sure people are seen and heard and responded to?
Sure, we have a motto with the Southside Trauma Informed Community Network, and we basically, it is, I see you and you matter. Very simple. I see you and you matter. And what that means to us is that whether you're homeless or jobless or with a lack of education, you can still come to our meeting, which is open to the public, and share in knowledge and experience and trauma and resilience. And so, Chloe, you might remember, I guess it was a year ago, this past November, we had a person to come in to our meeting, and he was a homeless man. He asked if he could join the meeting. The meeting had already started. He had on a trench coat, and he came into the meeting, and he sat down, and he said, well, what is this meeting about? And so we told him what we were doing and what we were studying. And we could, I think all of us in that circle could probably tell that there was some trauma going on at that moment. He looked like a homeless man. He had on a trench coat. But halfway through our meeting, he pulled out a machete. And we weren't expecting that. He didn't actually pull it out to turn on anyone. He took off his trench coat. And when he took off his trench coat, we happened to notice he was carrying a weapon. And it was a 1.5 foot long machete. And so as the convener of the meeting, I'm saying to myself, wow, this is going to get really interesting. But we kept going. He sat next to Chloe. Chloe kept her cool. I kept eye contact with everybody in the room. And we didn't lose anybody. Eventually, there was one person who said, I have to leave because I was assaulted by a person with a weapon. And this was re-traumatizing. We understood that. But by the same token, I didn't stop the meeting and call the cops. Why? Because we all carry some experience that could be considered negative. And this man, as a homeless man, basically wanted to partake in our meeting. And we had various trinkets in a box, a treasure chest, which could have been anything from bubbles to pipe cleaners to little teddy bears. He took the little teddy bear out of the box and started making a scarf out of the pipe cleaners to wrap around the teddy bear. And this was November. So this was getting close to the time when it was getting colder and the holidays were coming. At the end of the meeting, he said, "Thank you for letting me share my story." He worked on the Douglas Wilder campaign. He was a veteran experiencing trauma, and it had turned dark because it was November. So I say, one of our mottos is, I see you and you matter. Now, you know, we certainly weren't expecting a weapon to be seen during the meeting, but we were able to keep our composure and get through to the other side. And so, you know, it wasn't, everybody didn't show up in a suit and a tie and, you know, wonderful business, you know, attire. We show up however we are who we are, and we move forward. We move through the experience. And that was one of our changing experiences for those people who were in the room. We really didn't address, you know, anything different with anybody in the room. And so that's what we have to do to be able to connect with community. We're not doing enough for the Latino community. We really need to do more. You know, our information needs to be in Spanish so that they can understand and hear that. We have some communities in Petersburg that are just getting clean water. And you might have heard about it on the news, but it is real. And these are people that live in trailer parks where perhaps their governmental body turn off water because they didn't pay their bill. But we also know that in the time of COVID-19, you can't go without washing your hands. You can't go without washing your body. Fortunately, because of our partnership with the Crater Health District that really puts me in this place, we can communicate both the science to the council of what COVID does, as well as we can help to restore or be able to build resilience from the trauma, the impact of trauma that these people might be experiencing because they can't wash their hands. They can't take a shower. And so these are some of the things that we were doing behind the scenes to try to continue to build a network. But when we think in terms of the public programming, you know, I encourage everybody to follow some of the leaders that we had at our last summit. People like Dr. Joy DeGruy, who talks about 400 years of slavery, or what happens to the body in the DNA 400 years after slavery. What's happening to Black people and people of color because they have had to endure the pain and suffering of slavery. So she talks about that. Jonathan Wilson Hartgrove is a minister who comes from, I believe, North Carolina. I believe Coming to the Table introduced us to him. He talks about white slaveholder religion. I never knew there was such a thing until I started following Jonathan Wilson Hartgrove. Another name you should know is Dr. Kamara Jones. She talks about the health inequities that happen across America. She uses a pure and simple example of two plants, a pink rose and a red rose. The red rose gets all of the fertilization and water. The pink rose basically goes on a starvation diet. Which one do you think survives? The red rose survives. And having to be a gardener and a horticulturist, I can identify with what she's talking about. But when you look at our communities of color, we don't find doctors in those communities anymore. We used to, but we don't anymore because of big business. They've taken over and moved people out of the community into larger scenarios. So that's something we want to think about. Ivan Juzane, who's from Philadelphia, talks about working through the educational system so people of color can understand how to deal with mainstream education. Very important. One last one I wanted to mention, Chloe, and that's Helga Lust, who also talked about in our 2019 summit, how the environment that you live in really impacts your health. So as I mentioned earlier in the week in one of our other presentations, if you live across the street from a landfill, the methane gas and other things that are there can cause you major, major pain and suffering. And we may not even understand that that's going on. But in Petersburg, Virginia, when I first went there in 2014, I would see what looked like a mountain with snow on it. And then the snow started moving. It started flying through the sky. They were seagulls. And the mountain was the largest, tallest peak in the city. So if you can imagine that across the street from an elementary school that your child has to go to get their education. These things are very impactful. So we try to tell our truth through those realities. We're in an impoverished community. The average income is $30,000 for a family of 3 or 4 in most cases. And there's no major industry there. The biggest industry is the city of Petersburg government and Fort Lee military. And Fort Lee is actually in 2 or 3 different localities. So the last one is Southside Regional Medical. So those are the 3 industries that are in the region. The average income is that of poverty. So those are some of the scenarios that we deal with in the Southside Trauma Informed Community Network. And it's very important that we understand where people are and we meet them there. Thank you, Chloe.
Thank you for sharing. Let's go ahead and start wrapping up. We're getting short on time. I'm just going to hand it off to each presenter to say something that resonates with you or that may resonate with those listening, and kind of give an action-oriented tip that your organizations live by to our participants as something that you can share with them to move this conversation forward. Let's start off with coming to the table.
Well, I'm going to reflect back on one of my heroes, my personal heroes, which is Bryan Stevenson. If you don't know him, you should. Author of Just Mercy and the IGA in Alabama. And 3 things that he talks about in all of his presentations are how to erase the distance between where you are and what needs to happen. Getting proximate with being the change that needs to happen and seeing where you fit into that scenario, that equation. The second thing he talks about all the time is changing the narrative. And even in this time of COVID, when we're not meeting at the table literally, this is your time to look at your personal stories, see how you fit into the scheme of things and this concept of race, where you are and where you want to go. Take the time to read a book. Take the time to watch a movie. Take the time to have a conversation with somebody that you would normally have a conversation with. And the third thing, and this is probably the most important thing, and the thing that coming to the table does best, hold on to your hope. Hold on to your vision. Be willing to cultivate within yourself how you believe that your humanity should show up in the world. Those are the 3 things that I would leave. Getting in proximity, looking at your own narrative, and taking care and cultivating your hope for the future.
Thank you. Frank?
Yeah, I would say that you need to put that as eloquently as possible, and I don't know how to follow, but I would just say that for me, I think what stands out in these conversations is being able to tell our truth, our history, our truth in history, and coalition building. I think that those 2 things are really important in moving forward, as this movement has impacted us in ways that many of us may not have thought was possible with COVID-19 and with the murder and lynching of George Floyd. It has created a new awareness of the economic inequalities that have existed in this country for hundreds of years. And it's a shame that it takes events like this to really bring it to the forefront. But I am so encouraged by the youth movement and the involvement of, Black Lives Matter, Latina X, the Poor People's Campaign, and one of the things that I'm doing as the co-chair of the Reparations Circle, but also as the owner and founder of the SEED initiative, is working with other organizations in the community, building partnerships, building those coalitions across those racial color lines and social boundaries that sometimes we face. And to me, it's important that we all understand each other's truth. You know, Indigenous people of this country have their truth, as well as Native Americans, excuse me, as well as Mexican Americans and African Americans who have a different story. And so understanding those three stories and how those things connect in a way that brings us together, because again, I don't think that we can solve any of these problems or these issues without doing it together. So I encourage everyone to go to our website and look for resources, look for organizations that you can support, look for ways that you can connect and learn more about these issues that are troubling us and that have been troubling us. And more importantly, work with us on finding solutions. A number of things have been proposed that we do, and we are looking for more opportunities for people to offer solutions that we can support and champion. So get involved, be a part of a movement, not just by writing a check or expressing your voice or marching the street, but be active with voter registration, be active with providing education to people that need it, be active with trying to make sure that people who need healthcare or mental health have those resources, or at least directed to those resources. So there's something that we can do, each of us can do together and collectively. And I hope to see us all try to make more conversations like this happen so that we can start game planning for what's on the other side.
Thank you. Melinda?
So speaking as an individual working with the Truth Telling Project, I want to just offer that a position, an indisputable position, that racism is a profound deviation from the standard of true morality, and which deprives a portion of humanity the opportunity to cultivate and express the full range of capabilities and to live a meaningful and flourishing life, and transforming our society, our communities, the world is deeply affected by love, and it's the way in which all the work that all of you are doing are infusing individuals and families, neighborhoods and social spaces with an alternative to hate. And finally, that we're at a precipice. Humanity's evolution is shifting from very turbulent adolescence, if you will, into maturity. And that maturity is where we can live with differences, and we can reconcile these conflicts and understand, embrace the notion of the oneness of humankind, or that we all are one human family. And we effort to bring that in our work, and I glean that all of you are as well. And I'm deeply honored to hear your stories.
Thank you. Brian?
Trying to unmute myself. I really want to give this opportunity for thanks and gratitude to everybody who's doing the work. And I think it's important for us to do the work. And there's a lot of work to come. And I share this with you because I really want everybody to realize that even though we're in COVID-19 and this pandemic, which hasn't happened in 100 years, we still have the aftermath of the pandemic to deal with. So we have to continue to sharpen the saw and understand how to, cut to the chase to get to help. We have to help people. And so if this has taught me nothing, else, it's taught me that, you know, people, we need to be able to reach out and touch one another every now and then. And Zoom does its best to connect us in a way that technology does. But the pandemic is real, but the mental health challenges that are coming are real too. And we really need to keep that in the forefront of the work that we're doing to make sure that we don't leave anybody behind and that we can be stronger at what we do to build that resilience for the days to come. So thank you. I appreciate this opportunity.
Thanks for sharing. Tina? Mute. Unmute. There you go.
Okay, great. All right. Sorry about that. Thanks again for this great conversation and this opportunity. Chloe, your vision and your wherewithal to see, you know, how these conversations can flourish and blossom with different perspectives and through each of our stories and how we impact our communities. So I was taking a couple of notes because there's so many good comments that are going around. But I do want to encourage us to know that we can and we will. This fight to justice is going to be long. It's going to be a long fought road, but we have to continue to pave this road for our young people and to have them, you know, not to reserve themselves, but to pace themselves, because we don't want to get tired. We want to be to have the full endurance that we're able to have to fight this fight. This is not an easy fight, and so we need to pace ourselves and practice self-care, but to continue to share our stories and impact our next generations. This is a marathon, and so we're going to win, you know, this by inch by inch. And so I want to say that we can and we will. Healing and dealing with our own truths is sometimes very traumatic in itself. As someone mentioned earlier today with COVID-19, helping to build resilience is one thing, but re-traumatizing ourselves, you know, is a real thing when we are trying to help others through this struggle. So myself, you know, I've gotten traumatized myself, just sharing my story about growing up as a biracial child that was never accepted by people that were Caucasian or people that were Black, and I could never understand why I wasn't good enough. But helping kids know that they are good enough, or kids and older people, but especially our young kids, that they are good enough and that they do bring value to the table and that their voices are important, and, you know, sharing their truths is important, but to do it in a way that we can help have some reserve to continue this great fight. And I just want to say that, you know, I want to mimic the words of our late great Congressman John Lewis: make good trouble, continue to make good trouble, and to have some endurance to fight this fight in a way that's strategic. So thank you guys for having me. Thank you for including me. And everyone here, I just want to continue to remind people that breaking generational cycles is something that's possible, and we can do that together.
Thank you. And in closing, I think I realized midway through this presentation that I may have not introduced myself, or maybe I did. Done a few this weekend, introduced a lot of people, but so my name is Chloe Edwards with Voices for Virginia's Children, and we work on the campaign for a trauma-informed Virginia, and this is a result of the direction the campaign has moved in. But what I want to iterate is that Racial Truth and Reconciliation Week began with a conversation. The vision of the week began with a conversation, and I want to thank two of the founders of this vision who are on the phone: Tina Stevens with your Winchester area tick-in and Brian Little with the Southside tick-in. Because when Black Lives Matter occurred following COVID-19, and I say occurred but really resurfaced, we knew that we had to do something. And as people of color, a lot of that weight is put on us to act and to respond to inequities that impact our community, to traumas that impact our communities. But as the governor of Virginia recognizes Racial Truth and Reconciliation Week, which you can find on our website, I want to iterate what this conversation embodies, which is social progress. And social progress begins when we build and create inclusive communities that affirm the experiences of oppressed communities. Social progress occurs when we stand alongside those who experience an injustice, and we make racism not just another conversation, but instead an institutional intolerance through our actions. And social progress occurs when we dismantle systems of oppression, and we know that whiteness created those systems. So it will require the work and the support of white allies to dismantle those systems. And so as we move forward, I do encourage everyone to attend the Where Do We Go From Here, which is at 4 p.m. today. We have over 70 RSVP'd, but this is not a trend. I've heard people say Black Lives Matter is a trend. It's not a trend. This is not just a week. We're really going to move these conversations forward. And so I hope everyone can be a part of that. Thank you for joining us today.
So much.